Happy Friday, Dog Nation. Welcome into DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia. We'll also look ahead to what's going to be retribution for some of the starters who were kind of criticized week one last Saturday, including the Georgia offensive line. We'll get to that in just a moment. And there is one thing that I continue to hear coming from one Georgia position group, and I think that's really nice to hear if you're a UGA fan especially. I think it could tell us something about the upcoming season. I'll get to that coming up in just a couple of minutes, too. I'm really glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is presented by Kroger. More ways to save fresh food, low prices at Kroger.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I have been very honest with you all through the years. There's probably a really good chance that somewhere in my lineage several generations ago that my great-great-great-grandfather or somebody like that had to have been like an old-school carnival barker because, you know, I've got that hype gene just kind of in my nature. I like hyperbole. I like building stuff up. You know, I like kind of going back and forth with y'all when it comes to hot takes and things like that. And so I have a tendency to look at things in the most dramatic way possible, and tomorrow for Georgia is another practice. It's another scrimmage, and on the one hand, it's like hot day, you know, ready to start playing against somebody other than your own teammates, ready to go out and hit somebody else in a different color jersey. I'm sure for a lot of these guys, they're just ready to kind of go through the motions and maybe get to the games that really count, and the practices, by the way, that really count when you were practicing for another opponent. However, there is also another way to look at what's going to go down on Saturday for the Georgia scrimmage number 2 of this summer session, which kind of began at the end of July here. After a week last Saturday in which Georgia coach Kirby Smart came in his press conference and, you know, kind of had some critical things to say, you know, wasn't necessarily pounding the podium with his fist or anything like that, but he was, you know, just overall kind of talking about a sense of lethargy where it seems like the energy, the enthusiasm of the practice, the pace of play was really dictated by the younger guys, by the guys that we don't think of as first-team guys, maybe some of those guys fighting for a spot on this roster or a 70-man travel roster at least, going to Vanderbilt on August 31st. Those were the guys that seemed to be providing the energy of practice last week, and maybe the Georgia starters, and you know, I'll be careful here not to speculate on why they weren't bringing the injury, whether it was somewhat complacent about the fact they maybe feel like they have a position secured or maybe just tired from having been in a hot practice on Friday as well. But one way or another, they kind of weren't, according to Kirby Smart and even some other players who spoke on this subject this week, they weren't necessarily bringing the intensity at the highest level when it came to what happened last Saturday. And this Saturday is a chance to change all that. But before I get to that, let me kind of validate the point that I'm making when it comes to what may be the best unit of all on this Georgia roster. The Georgia offensive line, potential All-Americans, potential first-round picks. I mean, I've written for DawgNation.com. There's a scenario in which they have 4 guys drafted this upcoming April in the NFL draft. This is on paper a stellar offensive line, but last Saturday, maybe not so much. Here's what Kirby Smart said.
You know, I know that if you're not scoring points on offense, there's probably not going to be a lot of all lining up for awards. And, you know, we didn't score a lot of points today. So at the end of the day, it's one of those things, how well you perform, what is your identity, what are you trying to create? Because there's some good players on that offensive line, but good players got to play good.
Good players got to play good. The insinuation from Kirby Smart is last Saturday, the offensive line, to use his phrase, didn't play good. They didn't get it done against their opponents. Sometimes maybe the first-team defense, maybe sometimes not the first-team defense. But one way or another, Kirby was hoping to see a little more from his offensive line than he saw last week. Now, it's hard to have a rooting interest in a game that you won't see or something that simulates an actual game, real football that you won't see. But if I could suggest to you here today on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger, if I could suggest to you today what you ought to be rooting for in the Georgia scrimmage tomorrow, I think it's time for that offensive line to assert itself. Now, my guess is it probably will, certainly over the course of the next couple of weeks, and most of the teams that Georgia play this season won't have a defense as good as the one that the Georgia offensive line is battling during practice. We all know that. That's all well understood. But on a Saturday a week ago, when we were told that, hey, the cemented starters, the first-team offense, in some cases first-team defense, didn't exactly bring it, had a little bit of lethargy, tomorrow is the day I think you need to root for that to change because, as I've said before, and I'm going to keep saying this, Georgia's national championship hopes this season, as much fun as it is to talk about newcomers and as much fun as it is to talk about younger players and maybe an expanded role here this season, that always brings an energy to the conversation around college football, but those are players that supplement Georgia's national championship bid. They don't provide the catalyst for that bid. But guys like the Georgia offensive line, quarterback Jake Fromm, DeAndre Swift, J.R. Reed, who we'll hear from later on the other side of the ball, those are the guys that really provide the catalyst. They are the engine that drives the whole thing. So tomorrow afternoon, when Kirby Smart speaks as part of his press conference, and obviously DawgNation will have all kinds of coverage of that tomorrow, I think the thing that you ought to be rooting for is that for what was said about the offensive line last Saturday to be kind of a warning shot, and all of a sudden this Saturday, Kirby Smart says, boy, I don't know what was into them last week, but this week these guys came ready to play. This week these guys were bullying and mauling and opening holes, and Jake Fromm's throwing touchdown passes, crisp energy provided by the names that fans know about the most. That's the thing I think that Georgia fans ought to be hoping for from the scrimmage on Saturday. However, with that said, admittedly, there is always a lot of just enthusiasm when it comes to talking about some of these newcomers, the curiosity of just how good some of these five-star freshmen might be, both in a practice setting like this against other elite competition and how much of them we may see early on in the season against Vanderbilt in the season opener and kind of everything else that's going to happen for Georgia following that in the month of September. So as we sort of set the stage for scrimmage 2, I don't want to forget about some of those names because, as Kirby Smart said, he got a chance to really evaluate those guys a whole lot more last week, and there's also a chance to do some of that coming up tomorrow as well. So here is a little bit of an update on some of these freshmen, some of these guys we haven't talked about maybe enough yet on DawgNation Daily here this week. Take a listen to Kirby again.
I think the mid-year freshmen, I don't even see them as freshmen. I mean, they're like Lewis, made some plays, man, Nolan, Kobe, all those guys that you guys have known about through last spring, they kind of like comfortable out there playing. The newest guys is George, Dom, Kenny McIntosh made some nice plays. Those guys are getting to kind of be the guys that are like, wow, this is my first scrimmage. The defensive lineman, Trevon gets some work in there, and Timon Bill and Zion get some work. The two linebackers, Ryan and Tresman, we had them all spring, but we didn't get to see them do much. They got a lot of reps today. They're going to have to be guys that can really help us on special teams in order to make the bus, to make the trip. And both those guys are picking things up well. They're not ahead of the guys older than them yet, though.
So listen, I'm just like all of you. Obviously, I just made the strong case for why the Georgia veterans, the juniors, in some cases seniors, those are the guys who need to have the biggest, best scrimmage tomorrow. And hopefully when we hear Kirby Smart speak in the post-game press conference, if you're a Georgia fan, I think you'll be very happy if that's some of the information that Kirby Smart provides. However, to go along with that, it's hard not to be excited about some of these young guys that Kirby had a chance to evaluate during the spring and now seeing in a more intense version of competition here during the summer. The closer we get to the start of the season, the more I start to realize that, freshmen are probably a bigger part of the overall two deep and the overall profile for Georgia than I realized. Either way, with this nice mix of young guys and veterans and kind of everything else in between, Georgia needs another good scrimmage tomorrow, or needs a better scrimmage tomorrow than it had last Saturday. It's an important step towards getting ready for the start of the season, and I, for one, can't wait to hear what Kirby Smart has to say about it when it's all said and done. Good morning, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us live on video today, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Radio Noon, of course, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev, and as a podcast, Apple Podcast Player, the Google Podcast Player, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're just really glad to have you here with us on our program here today. And by the way, speaking of Kroger, they bring it all to you. And don't forget, I know that your kids have gone back to school, and we're talking about the start of the college football season. It may seem like fall is here now, but if you're outside, you know that's not the case. It is still summer as far as the weather is concerned, which means you're still having pool parties. You're still out on the back patio, the back deck, or the front porch on the weekends. You're having these summer parties. Well, those summer vibes are taking place at Kroger even still. They've been going on all summer long, and they continue on that way right now. So you want to fill up the cooler. You want to get meat for the grill. You kind of want to get those chips and dips and everything else that goes along with your summer party. It's all right there for you at your local Kroger, so make sure you check that out. It's great to have Kroger with us as a part of DawgNation Daily today. And speaking of Kroger, less than a week from now, Thursday, August 22nd, we will be there. The Kroger Marketplace incoming, 5550 Bethelview Road there for our Kroger kickoff. This is a gigantic event last year, and it's going to be an incredible event this year as well. The entire DawgNation team on hand, looking ahead to the start of the upcoming season, hanging out with so many of you. It's the Crowbar, kind of like right there in the middle of the place, in the middle of the Kroger Marketplace facility. Just an unbelievably cool spot to hang out and have a good time. And I've been walking around all morning with a T-shirt, a DawgNation T-shirt. I don't have it now. I don't know what I did with it. I had this thing all morning. Anyway, we're going to give those away to the folks who show up and hang out with us coming up next Thursday. So if you come, you will get a DawgNation T-shirt. That is my promise to you. As I said before, I don't know what I did with my T-shirt. I've been carrying around all day long. But when we get together for DawgNation events, it's always one of the things I really enjoy doing. I love being able to give out the T-shirt, and we will do that. Hey, look at this. You ask and you shall receive. It shows up right here. I think this is one of the cooler ones we've done as of late. If you're, of course, listening on the radio or the podcast, I realize you can't see a thing that I'm doing right now. But let me just try to describe. Nice gray, soft material. This kind of thing that's comfortable. It's got the really cool, DawgNation brand logo here on the front of that there. So we're going to give these away on Thursday at Kroger Marketplace for the DawgNation Kroger kickoff to start the upcoming season. Y'all, this is going to be a lot of fun. Please, please, please join us there. Not just me. Connor's going to be there. Our buddy Jeff Santel. Our buddy Mike Griffith coming in from Athens, so you know it's a big deal. It's all going to go down this Thursday, August 22nd. Kroger Marketplace, 5550 Bethelview Road incoming. That begins at 6 p.m. By the way, write that address down, 5550 Bethelview Road. There are a couple Krogers right there in the area. You want to make sure you're at the big one, the big marketplace, right there off exit 13 incoming. So that's going to be a really good time. All right. Before we just talk a little recruiting with Jeff Santel here today, let me go around the doghouse presented by Merriweather and Tharp today. And I said this to our video audience before our show started. There is one thing that I keep hearing from a certain Georgia position group. And to me, this means something. To me, this is more than just kind of the typical happy talk that might be out there before the start of the season. I get the impression, and y'all have probably heard me say this before, I get the impression that the Georgia secondary is pretty confident. And I get the impression that Kirby Smart validates that confidence by also being confident in that group himself. Now, one of my favorite guys to hear speak for Georgia is one of the team leaders, both vocal and on the field, the safety J.R. Reed. I loved him at SEC Media Days. I really have enjoyed every conversation I've been able to have with him. Even, unfortunately, after losses, Reed always has a really good perspective on what's going on there. You just understand why he's gained the stature within the Georgia program that he's gained. And yesterday, he was talking about the way in which that he's kind of grown and developed over the course, or I shouldn't say not just the way that he's grown and developed, but the way that his opinion of the other guys in the secondary, his opinion of them has kind of grown and developed. I told you before that there's confidence when it comes to this Georgia secondary. Here is a part of Around the Doghouse presented by my friends at Merriweather and Tharp. Listen to J.R. Reed in particular and notice that confidence for yourself. Here is J.R.
I feel a lot better about if one guy goes down, we have someone to plug him in. In all areas, everyone can really play anywhere on that field. And it's not only the depth, we have people that know what to do in that depth, even the freshmen.
Even the freshmen, he says, I feel really good that those guys know what to do, and I've grown in that confidence over the course of the time. And we've heard other things like this in the past, that these guys have been here. Tyreek Stevenson, DJ Daniel, the entire group that makes up that Georgia secondary, they had the chance to go through Georgia spring practice, and Kirby told us at the time that it mattered. I think it still matters now. And in fact, to bolster the claim made by J.R. Reed, the fact that when he looks around, he sees interchangeable parts that that provides the depth that Georgia needs to get it done in the secondary. I mean, Kirby Smart just last week essentially accentuated the same point. Here is Smart backing up the claim that J.R. Reed just made.
I feel a lot better about if one guy goes down, we have someone to plug him in.
DJ Daniels has been a pleasant surprise. DJ Daniels done a good job. He's gone with the ones quite a bit. Tyson got dinged up a little bit today. Hopefully he'll be back. But Stokes has been going with the ones. Tyson's gone with the ones. DJ's gone with the ones. Tyreek's gone in there some. So they're all getting good work. The thing that you guys want to measure is who's with the ones, and we're trying to get matchups. So I want every corner to go against Tyler Simmons. I want every corner to go against Lawrence Cager. I want every corner to go. So the only way you get that is you move guys around. So we're just not really looking at a depth chart. We're looking at who's winning the 50-50 balls, who's not giving up big plays, who's making big plays. And it's not fair to judge a guy if he goes against the third team wide out the whole time. So we've really thrown those guys around.
So JR says, I think this group looks pretty interchangeable right now. Kirby Smart kind of says the same thing right there. Now, I'm on record as saying, obviously, everybody is impressed and feels good about Eric Stokes right now, but I also like Tyson Campbell at that other cornerback spot because of his speed, because of his experience. However, I hear some of these same things that JR is just talking about and Kirby Smart just said. The fact that DJ Daniel has apparently looked pretty good at practice, that seems to be a real thing. Tyreek Stevenson is a legit prospect, got the size, got the speed, got the arm length, everything you want from a top-flight defensive back. He seems to be solid in this discussion, too. Lewis Seen, you heard Kirby Smart mention him before. This does look like a pretty deep Georgia secondary right now, and that may be one of the things that Georgia knows about itself that the rest of the country hasn't quite figured out yet. It's Around the Doghouse is presented by my friends at Merriweather and Tharp, and obviously divorce is the kind of thing when I say that on this show, it kind of stops everybody in their tracks because, let's face it can be scary, it can be confusing, and when you think about divorce, sometimes you may be thinking about going through that process alone. That is not what you want to do. No one should have to do that. That's one of the real bedrock beliefs of my friends at Merriweather and Tharp. They want you to have an advocate on your side. And my suggestion is that you choose Merriweather and Tharp to be that advocate because they're going to give you the free consultation. They're going to kind of set you up to put your family, make that feel better again, bring it all, made whole again, really setting you up for a kind of life where you can feel comfortable and at peace again, even going through a difficult time like this. But you've got to reach out to them and find them online. It's theatlantadivorceteam.com. theatlantadivorceteam.com. That gets you in touch with my friends at Merriweather and Tharp. All right, good to have you with us here today. It's DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. As promised, what do you say we do a little recruiting talk with Jeff Sintel right now? And we'll get Jeff coming up in just a minute here on DawgNation Daily. Jeff out and about a bunch last night. I understand that he spoke to the Augusta Bulldog Club last night, so hanging out over in East Georgia. That's always a fun thing to do, and Jeff apparently had a good time with that. So we'll talk to him coming up. Also, as a part of our SEC through, a little bit of an interesting piece of news involving another member of Florida's 2019 class. Apparently not going to be in Gainesville with the Gators. We'll obviously have a good time with that, too. And, of course, here on video, we'll take a lot of your questions and comments, part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down a bit later on today as well, as we look ahead to what's still to come for Georgia practice over the course of the next few days. And we will deal with a lot of recruiting stuff with Mr. Sintel here coming up, too. There is kind of some interesting news involving B.J. Ojulari, the brother of Aziz Ojulari. He's getting ready to make his college choice. We'll kind of find out, I guess why it was that BJ and Georgia never quite seemed to be, operating within the same orbit all that much. There was the occasional whisper here and there, but that never became too big or too significant when it comes to that. So we'll talk about that. Cedric Van Pran had kind of an interesting tweet, and he's one of those guys that came up on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger on Wednesday where it almost seemed like maybe that timeline has slowed down for him a little bit compared to what I thought it was going to be, at least based on some of the chatter that was out there as recently as a few weeks ago. I may be wrong about that. I'll let Jeff correct kind of fact from fiction on me when it comes to that. And, of course, we'll get our obligatory running back update and kind of everything else. We'll do that with Jeff Sintel here coming up in just a moment. While we are waiting on Mr. Sintel, though, I'll pop over here and take a couple of your comments here very quickly, too, and we'll do a lot more of these a bit later on, but we'll kind of jump in here and get a few of these right now on a Friday. And, of course, I know a lot of you have big weekend plans coming up, so I appreciate you spending some time here with that. Clarence Dawson said, be a still concern with our wide receivers. I understand that. I mean, the point that I've made when it comes to the wide receiver position is that doing what Georgia did a year ago is actually maybe not quite as hard as some people think, because programs have a track record, new names. Georgia's replaced its receivers before. So doing what Georgia did a year ago actually may not be that hard to do, even with a crop of inexperienced guys. But being as good as what the national elite have been at the wide receiver position, that's a question that I think that Georgia still has to answer, and none of us will probably know that until the season actually gets here. We'll take a lot more of your comments coming up, but for now, though, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, let's get ready to talk to Jeff Sintel.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, always fun to get a chance to talk a little recruiting with Jeff Sintel. And Jeff, a lot I want to get into with you, especially now that we're actually really getting close to the start of the high school season. You've got a lot of these big national showcase games coming up over the next couple of weeks here in the state of Georgia. It heats up big time next week as well. So that's going to be kind of a fun thing for us to chat about on Friday. But before any of that, I understand that you were out and about last night, spent a little time in Augusta with the Augusta Bulldog Club. I know that's a great group of dog fans, and I know they were glad to have you in the building with them last night. I hope you had a good time doing that.
Oh, man, it was great, Brandon, to be in Richmond County with some good people. That was one of my very first stops as a Cub reporter coming up. This is a funny story, Brandon. It's kind of like following you around at all of our Dog Nation meet and greets, because they had Lauren Smith speak, Bob Rathburn, the voice of the Hawks, speak. You had Tom Crean speak. You had Dominic Wilkins speak. And then there came this Jeff dude to tell everybody about Dog Nation and football. I can literally say now I know what it's like to feel like following Dominic Wilkins in a slam dunk contest, because Dominic's speech last night was a slam dunk, and then came old Jeff out there to try and talk some football.
Well, I don't know about comparing me to the human highlight film. I'll certainly take that as a compliment. That may be overstating matters just a bit. But before we kind of move on to the topic at hand, I mean, you get a chance to see Crean in that environment last night, and one of the things that I really like about him is the way that he sold the Georgia basketball program thus far. And in a room that's obviously rabid for football, he is the kind of guy that can convert some of those over to basketball. I mean, you know this as well as anybody. If you're the Georgia basketball coach, your job isn't just to recruit players. It is to recruit fans. Basketball just remains in the shadow of football for the most part. But Crean may have the personality to be able to do something about that. Did you get a chance to see that with your own eyes with the Augusta Bulldog Club last night?
Yeah, it was funny, Brandon. You're not the human highlight show, maybe the human soundbite. But the Crean, I think he went about 19 and a half minutes on his speech. It looked like he just got back from the beach, but he was selling Georgia. He was barking and talking about all things Georgia. It was very interesting how the comments he made about Anthony Ant-Man Edwards. It was also very interesting how, Dominic said, listen, Bulldog Nation, this is the right man for the job. This is the coach that's going to make it happen for us. But, Tom Crean told a story, a very specific Dominic Wilkins story about him growing up in the Midwest and how a guy like Dominic Wilkins was one of those guys that just transcended the school, and how he put Georgia basketball on the map for him just because of his immense talent. And he didn't make the direct point, but I'm sure everybody got the gist that Anthony Edwards can very much do the same things for Georgia this year.
All right, let me get into the recruiting stuff here. Let me start with some news that's going to go down today. B.J. Ojulari, the brother of Aziz Ojulari, is going to make his college decision. Now, Georgia's going to have a hat on the table. In fact, our video audience here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, can get to see that right now. But I'm almost 100% sure that B.J. won't be putting the Georgia hat on today, and I'm guessing you'll say the same thing. He's clearly a good player. He's obviously comes from a very good family. Aziz is a great representative of UGA, for instance. So why was it, or why is it, that Georgia and B.J. Ojulari have just never quite gotten into the same orbit? It's because of all the other outside linebackers that Georgia's brought in recent years. What was it about B.J. and UGA that has just never quite seemed destined to be?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's a great arc question for us to discuss Georgia recruiting. I think 2 years ago, I think maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, B.J. Ojulari might have been one of the top top guys on the board at outside linebacker in any recruiting class for Georgia, but just a different Georgia. I think there's 3 maybe bullet points for understanding this decision. Number one is just look at the linebacker room. There's so many guys, including his brother, that's going to make it hard for any players to crack that rotation and to get into the 2 deep. Look at the way Georgia has maybe a little bit thrifty needs this year with its spots at linebacker. I still think they're only going to take 2 linebackers in this entire class, one inside, one outside. And Jay Sherman is already the nation's number 2 outside backer, a 5-star. He's about 6'3". He's about 235. Superior premium athlete, and it's just like a combination of Georgia not having the room to take or the need to take as many outside linebackers. I mean, can you imagine adding a B.J. Ojulari and a Mikhail Sherman to a room next year that's already going to have at least Azeez Ojulari, at least Adam Anderson, at least Nolan Smith, maybe not a Jermaine Johnson, Robert Beal. I mean, that's a stacked lot of room of a lot of Sunday players, and I just think B.J., barring a last-minute reversal here, I just think for the longest time he's wanted to be his own man, do his own thing, and I think he's been recruited heavily enough and for long enough to know what strong, we need you, got to have you interest looks like from other schools, and I don't think he's gotten that from Georgia for the volume and the duration of time as he has from a few other SEC schools.
Obviously, brothers are different in terms of their athletic profiles even, and yet I also noticed that Azeez Ojulari, I think, is a player thought of in greater stature now than he was when he first signed with UGA. He's going to play like a 5-star, in other words, maybe, even though he wasn't rated that way coming out of high school. Do you think there's a similar opportunity that B.J. Ojulari may grow into a player in the college ranks that's just frankly bigger and better than what we think of him as a high school player? He's already, of course, thought of as a good high school player. Do you think there's a chance, though, that he also increases his reputation once he gets on campus the way that Azeez Ojulari seemingly has? Azeez may be Georgia's number 1 outside linebacker this year.
Yeah, Brandon, I agree with you on that. I think Azeez is probably – we did something on the DawgNation forum recently in one of our threads where we kind of looked at, who are the best players on the team, and we rated them. I know everybody loves to read lists, and I clearly had Azeez in the top 10 for me already at Georgia, and that's saying quite a lot considering limited playing time a year ago, but also coming back from a knee injury. But look what he did against Texas. Look what he did at G-Day. He was with the ones out there at G-Day. Look at him already getting to come out, speak, and represent the defensive unit for Kirby Smart during fall camp. And, man, I think his brother's a very special player. I wrote about him one night. I saw him go against Wanye Morris as an outside linebacker pass rusher, and he played the whole game going against Wanye Morris on offense, and then he had to deal with, a strong All-American type player. Another guy from Grayson High School, he had to try and block him the whole game, and he was the highest graded offensive lineman. He was the highest graded defensive lineman for Marietta High that night. And I think B.J. Ojulari, in every right, I wouldn't be shocked to see him on an All-SEC team or two by the time his time on Saturdays are over. But I don't know if Georgia's going to be the place there. I don't know. I don't see, even with a leap that he makes, and even his brother kind of part of that logjam, I don't see how a B.J. Ojulari could play before 2021, 2022 for a program the way the depth chart at Georgia looks like right now at outside linebacker.
I want to talk to you about Cedric Van Pran for a moment. I thought we had an interesting discussion about him on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger on Wednesday. I also saw a tweet from Van Pran referencing the fact that he's now the nation's number 1 center. I'm assuming this is related to one of the recent re-ranks that took place by one of the national recruiting websites. But obviously Van Pran happy with where he's rated at the moment here. And I guess this is a guy, and I'm hoping you can separate fact from fiction on this for me just a little bit. It seems like at one point in time people were thinking that he might be accelerating his recruiting process, getting ready to commit. I haven't heard much on that as of late. Maybe, at least to my eyes, it almost looks like it may have slowed down a bit with Van Pran. Admittedly, I may be reading into that. What can you tell us about Cedric Van Pran and the chances that maybe he's ready to make a college decision soon, the way that some people at one point thought that he might be?
Yeah, Brandon, I can everybody wants to know who might be the next to commit to Georgia in the 2020 class, and certainly Cedric Van Pran is a name that belongs right up at the top of that discussion. He's a big target. He's very focused on his team at this point of his stage of his senior year. I think he's either going to make a commitment in the next 2 weeks here very shortly, or I think he's going to wait until after his senior season. I can't see him as a guy, I've never seen him as a guy that will do a lot of this recruiting research and thoughts channeling during his season, because he's one of those old school players that realizes that his high school season is still the most important thing at hand, even with all the potential hats he can put on the table. There was a re-rank there from Mr. Van Pran Granger. That's what we're going to start calling him now on DawgNation. It's Cedric Van Pran Granger. That's actually the full name, and there's one thing we can do here, Brandon. We can respect an individual's name, because that's, I think, the most personal thing we all have. So you got to go SVPG or something like that when you start talking about Cedric Van Pran now. And, man, he's just a great player. Just got that #1 overall rating as a center for Rivals. He's still the #3 overall center for the composite. And, Cedric Van Pran is a name, definitely. Cedric Van Pran Granger is a name to think about in terms of the possible offensive line close for the Georgia class.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting to think about. And, of course, he is a Louisiana resident that is also the home of LSU, which currently holds on to the commitment of 5-star cornerback Elias Ricks. You shocked a lot of people a couple of weeks ago when you started talking up the possibility that Georgia might be more in it for Ricks than some people realized. An official visit coming Georgia's way at the very least. You said maybe even more than that. This might be a recruiting battle that Georgia could win. I've had some people since then point out a couple of the things that Kendall Milton and Ricks have been saying to each other on social media, not necessarily, not necessarily moving the needle all that much, but pretty clearly it seems like Milton is trying to work on Ricks. I'm of the belief typically, though, that, Jeff, that these friendships, while they may seem stronger than Oak while in high school, they have a tendency to fade and fizzle once these guys get towards college. In fact, Ricks himself has even said that to you, that ultimately he and his good friend Kendall Milton will have to make their own college choices, and maybe it's the same, maybe it's different. Right now, at least on paper, it would appear to be different. How much do you think this friendship really could matter in terms of Georgia pulling what would be, I think you'd have to say, one of the bigger upsets for the 2020 class if it were able to go down?
Yeah, it's an intriguing thought, Brandon, because one of the things that Georgia does very well, and it's maybe a Kirby Smart signature on the recruiting path, is a late flip or a big flip. And, there's only a couple big-name candidates for flips that appears on our Hedges top targets list every week, and Elias Ricks is one of those, and Mr. Dexter out of the state of Florida is definitely one of those. But I'm just going to counsel here on this one that let's let this one marinate. Let's let the waters boil. Let's let the seeds kind of grow as they may here. I mean, those two kids are very tight. Those two dudes are very tight. They've long wanted to play together, but then they reached a point about 6-8 months ago where they realized the best fit for one may not be the best fit for the other. But let's just see if that visit happens. Let's just see if that official visit happens for the Notre Dame game on September the 21st. I'm pretty sure that's the unofficial visit that the Miltons are planning to take to Georgia as well, especially with that 8 p.m. kick time. Let's just see what happens. I don't know. Maybe that crowd might be a little DawgNation fan friendly. Might be a little loud. Might be something there for Georgia to make a move with that visit. I think that's probably the next seismic, moving of the tectonic recruiting plates to look at there with Mr. Ricks.
All right, let me do a couple things before we let you go here. Let me do running backs. Obviously, it would not be a DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger interview with you right now if we didn't at least touch on this just a little bit. And, the next big move to fall is, the timeline for Zachary Evans. We talked about this with Cedric Van Pran Granger a little earlier, and now it becomes the same thing with Evans. Is this one of those deals where he's going to drop some sort of announcement before his senior season begins there at North Shore in Houston, or is this the kind of thing where he's going to take a bunch of visits and wait and make his announcement later on? You and I both are of the belief that one way or another, the actual recruitment continues all the way to December. But how about in terms of next big announcements, next big pieces of news, dominoes to fall when it comes to Zachary Evans? What will be the next thing we hear, you think?
Good question. Well, I mean, there's kind of conflicting things, and, lots of people have to catch Zachary Evans on his Instagram feeds where he says his decision is pretty much made. But then, some of the on-the-record reporting around this recruitment has said that he's still going to take all of his official visits first before he makes his decision. Kind of quietly, I hear that Evans is really not a big fan of all the fanfare and the recruiting and everything that goes along with it. This is just one of those that it's really hard to get a read about, first, what he might do, his first feint into the hole here about where he could go. I think folks should not be shocked by anything Zachary Evans does, whether it's a commitment before his season or him holding true to his thoughts about, maybe he wants to take all his official visits before he makes a move. Evans is a guy that obviously Georgia made the decision they did with their pursuit of guys like Marshawn Lloyd and Tank Bigsby because they wanted to play the high-stakes, long-range game with Zachary Evans. And I think it's fairly safe to say that Georgia's going to be a contender for Zachary Evans until he puts his pen to paper, and that Georgia will be a consideration for that. And that's probably what anybody can hope to say right now. I hear some folks on the forum, they're like, man, if he would just commit to Georgia, that would make them feel better about that situation.
Not me.
I just think, man, we're talking about 4 rounds at Augusta National here, and whichever team is has the lead after 36 holes, I don't think the recruitment for Zachary Evans will really start until the last 15 days of December.
Without a doubt, in the last 24 hours on that recruitment, it's going to be pretty intense probably there as well. Yeah, I mean, I've said this a million times that obviously if Evans were to commit, I'd treat it as big news, and for Georgia fans, including myself, it would be good news, but it is not necessarily the final news. Now, as we get ready to wrap up on this today, speaking of the DawgNation Forum, Jeff, I've been taking a little friendly fire in the forum over the course of the last couple of days for what a few people on there have said is too much talk about the tight end position when it comes to Rick Gilbert, Darnell Washington, and even Theo Johnson, who I know is really impressed with a lot of these Big Ten schools right now. Now, let me defend myself for a moment, Jeff. First of all, I know what this is about. I am highlighting an area in which Georgia might not win with a 5-star, which can make some people kind of nervous sometimes. But listen, I got to call them the way that I see them. I got to talk about all the issues. I can't just accentuate the good news and not focus on the entirety of the news. But in terms of the tight end position not being as important as I have treated it as, this is the thing, Jeff, I'm going to push back on. When you look at the teams in the mix for national championships in college football, they are the teams that play tight ends. There are plenty of teams that have a fourth receiving option as a wide receiver. Those teams are playing in the Sun Bowl, Jeff. If you want to be in the college football playoff, you better have a tight end on the field, whether you throw to him or not, which is say nothing of the NFL level where the top tight ends in the National Football League play in the Super Bowl. Oftentimes the top receivers in the league play their games on TMZ. Tight end is a winning position in football, and in a year like this where there are so many elite ones, I'm not going to apologize for the attention that I've paid to the tight end position, but I'll give the floor to you. Do you think I've talked about it too much?
I think it's a different side of the equation. I think it's this Georgia class needs 2 tight ends. They're going to say bye-bye to Eli Wolf. They're going to say thanks for 4 years to Charlie Warner, and then that's just going to leave a redshirt junior and John Fitzpatrick and two true sophomores or maybe 2 true redshirt freshmen in Rylan Godey and also Brett Seither. So obviously they need 5 at least. And they need the type of guys that can scare a defense and stretch a defense. If you're talking about the boards, I think Georgia desperately needs 2 tight ends, but I don't think they're going to stretch if a 4th big-time receiver wants to join the fray or an extra defensive lineman wants to join the fray or an extra cornerback prospect like a Mr. Ricks. Like, if those guys fill up the board, I don't know how far they'll go down for 2 tight ends. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But I think the ideal close would be to get 2 of those top 3 names, Theo Johnson, Darnell Washington, and Eric Gilbert. And that's what everybody wants to see the recruiting look like. What do they want to see on the field? I mean, I'm of mind, and I mean, my opinion can probably be sharpened by seeing how well Georgia feeds the ball to its tight ends this fall under James Coley, but I don't know how in Georgia's offense and getting the balls to the playmaker that Georgia could ever feature 2 tight ends, much less 1 tight end, much less 2. And I mean featuring to the point where 30 catches and an Isaac Nod a season, two big-time tight ends like that get that sort of volume.
Yeah, you can play 2, but you're not going to throw a lot to 2. That's just the way the numbers go. And then to kind of wrap this up really quick, is it probably fair to say, I won't even do the Gilbert thing right now because we've done that so many times, but when it comes to Theo Johnson, another name we have been talking about for quite a while, that these Big Ten teams who have more of a history of throwing two tight ends, I mean the Michigans and the Iowas and a couple of those others, that those Big Ten schools right now, and maybe this is a geographic advantage as well, some of those Big Ten schools have kind of posted up when it comes to Theo a little bit here?
Yeah, they have. But, Theo, I've got a pretty good handle on his recruitment and what he's thinking and what will be the moving parts for him. And these are so close for Theo that he's just going to let one school separate itself over the course of some rapid-fire visits. And here's the things that are kind of the big tectonic plates. I can't believe I've said that twice in your show today. But the big tectonic plates for his recruitment is he wants to be around guys that he can see himself playing for, the brother-like atmosphere, playing in big games with. He wants to have a sense of camaraderie with the guys in the class. That's probably the second most important thing. The most important thing, especially to his mother, is the weight of the degree. It is, okay, you're 30 years old. What is a Georgia degree compared to an Iowa degree, a Michigan degree, or a Penn State degree going to do for you when you need to open doors in the business world when football's over with? I think that's very important to this family. And then he can't short sell what he saw at G-Day. What he saw at G-Day was a glorified scrimmage in the rain that still attracted right around 55,000 people, 50 to 55,000 people. What he saw that day really made a strong impact on him, especially when you think about the spring games and the energy and atmosphere at some of those Big Ten schools. There's a guy that doesn't have a lot of, I need to do this, I need to run great routes, you need to showcase me, I want to catch a lot of balls, I want to flex out and be a flex in. Theo's really a more of a normal recruit. I just want folks out there to realize that it's not Darnell Washington, Eric Gilbert, and if those two don't go Georgia's way, then you go to Theo Johnson. There's not a drop-off from any of these three young men. In certain areas, Theo Johnson is just as an impressive or maybe a more impressive prospect in certain areas compared to a Darnell Washington and an Eric Gilbert.
Well, Jeff, you always make a strong impression on us with the opinions that you provide on UGA recruiting when you join us here on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We appreciate your time. We hope you have safe travels, and we'll look forward to speaking to you soon here, back on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger very soon.
All right, guys. Should be a fun month, even before the games start getting played.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Did you catch that from Jeff Sintel there? Sounded like maybe a little bit of foreshadowing from him about something that might be coming down the pipe there. Pretty interesting stuff. Let me just say one more thing about the tight end situation. If you gave me my choice in college football, I can have the best receiver in the nation or the best tight end in the nation. At the college level, I'll take the best receiver in the nation. I got to have a good tight end, but if you give me the choice of one or the other at the college level, I'll take the nation's number one receiver. However, at the NFL level, if I can have the top tight end in the league or the top receiver in the league, I'll take the top tight end. I really will. And I think the results of the teams who've had the best tight ends probably speak for themselves on that. But nonetheless, it's time for our SEC Through. And as I transition to the SEC, let me tell you about some of my friends here. And for some of you who do this kind of work, this is an important group for you to know about because they're going to be able to increase your quality of life. They're going to put more money in your pocket and just more peace of mind about your work situation. I'm talking about the Atlanta and North Georgia Building Trades Council. The ANG TBC is dedicated to the work and economic stability of organized construction workers in North America, creating more work opportunities, living wages, and they protect benefits for all construction workers. So if this is the field that you're in, this is a group you want to know. Let me give you a couple of ways to get in touch with them. Go to GeorgiaConstructionCareers.com. The website, once again, GeorgiaConstructionCareers.com. Or you can dial this number, 404-584-0005. That's 404-584-0005. You can get in touch with the Atlanta and North Georgia Building Trades Council today. All right, so I wish I was a better person. I wish I was the kind of person that didn't take such spiteful glee in this, and some of you already know what I'm about to say, but more bad news for Florida, I am here to report. Now, this has been kind of, I guess, rumored now for a little while, but R.J. Henderson, the four-star receiver from Florida's 2019 class, has been reportedly, a number of sites have reported this now, been released from his scholarship at the University of Florida. This is another guy that apparently it's academically, didn't qualify academically, which I believe you got, Dijon Black and the other guy, that's like the third guy from the 2019 class for Florida that didn't qualify. So not a great run for Gators when it comes to that. And there's also a million guys that have seemingly all of a sudden decided not to use their scholarship at Florida for various reasons. But Henderson becomes another member of this 2019 class not to come. Now, listen, you can do some of this at Georgia as well, of course, with the 2018 class, which now has 3 of its highly recruited members no longer part of the roster. But Georgia's been stacking big-time classes on top of each other for a number of years. Florida was in the top 10 last year after it wasn't all that long ago. They weren't even in the top 20. Go back and look at McElwain's first class. Didn't even crack the top 20 of the 24/7 Sports Composite team ranking. So the Florida recruiting under McElwain has not been great. Beginning of the Mullen era, a little shaky. Last year was supposed to be the return to at least to some degree of recruiting prominence for Florida. Kind of sad how far they've fallen in last year's class, which was low top 10s, the kind of thing they were going to hang their hat on. All of a sudden now, though, that class is starting to show a little bit of attrition. So we take spiteful glee in that. A story that I don't take spiteful glee in. I don't like injuries. Nobody does, but I even feel that way about, these SEC rivals, the teams that Georgia plays, competes with, looks for a chance to battle it out with. I like the SEC at its best, and kind of sad news coming out of LSU, where Cardell Thomas, who was a big-time offensive line signee, a top 10 type offensive line signee, is now dealing with an injury. And according to the Baton Rouge Advocate, they're saying this injury could be serious. Now, I've read the story 3 times. They don't say what the injury is. He was also, I guess, at one point in time dealing with what Orgeron called a, quote, minor camp injury. So some of y'all may have, more friends in Louisiana than I do. You may know more about what's going on with Cardell Thomas here. But Thomas is a big-time name, a really big addition to the LSU program, and he's now dealing with an injury. And y'all know the corollary here, which is this is why you stack bodies in recruiting. This is why you put, big-time players on top of big-time players. Once you start running into each other during practice, you can only do so much to control what's actually going to happen beyond that. And you got to have elite talent and a lot of it to overcome the various injuries that come your way. One of the areas in which LSU is probably a little thinner than it is in other spots, maybe along that offensive line, they are not in a position where Thomas was a luxury. This was a guy that I know they have high hopes for, and we'll see what the future is for him and kind of what else comes out about the injury situation that he might be dealing with. Let me do a couple of other really quick stories here. So I guess Tracy Rocker, the Tennessee defensive assistant, met with the media this week, and he was asked about Aubrey Solomon. Now, y'all remember Solomon because the way that y'all think I talk about so-and-so recruit too much now, there were plenty of people who thought I talked about Aubrey Solomon way too much leading up to what was eventually him choosing Michigan as a part of the 2017 class. Was he a 2017 signee? 2017 to Michigan. It was 2017, yeah. 2017 to Michigan, then transferring to Tennessee. Now, when Solomon transferred to Tennessee, which was only a few months ago, but seems like a million years ago, it was like the Wild West for eligibility waivers, and it seemed like everybody was going to get a free pass, and I think a lot of Tennessee fans assumed that Solomon might get his free pass going from Ann Arbor to Tennessee, especially given the fact that Knoxville was a little closer to home, although Lee County, Georgia, not all that close necessarily. But according to what I read this week, they haven't heard anything about Solomon one way or another. In fact, one of the reporters asked Rocker, "Hey, what's the deal with Aubrey Solomon?" And Rocker's response back was, "You have to go ask our compliance department about that." So apparently they haven't heard anything. And for Tennessee fans, and I know y'all don't have any sympathy for the Vols fans, but they're frustrated about the fact they can't hear anything. And on that point, I'll at least agree with the Tennessee fans that one way or another, you ought to be able to hear something. Deny the request if you want to, but the way in which the NCAA has such a sliding scale of timelines, some things are handled very quickly, some things are not handled quickly, and in lower profile situations involving other sports, I think you'd be shocked to find out how some of these things can just drag on beyond the point of any level of decency. It's that lack of transparency, one of the reasons that so many people have such a big problem with the NCAA. And, Georgia fans aren't going to weep for Tennessee here, but the Aubrey Solomon is maybe another example of that. And I am happy to report this. Next Saturday, we have a real game. Now, I'm no fan of Florida, but I have never been hungrier for a chance to watch Florida play than I will be next Saturday against this game in Miami. This game is actually very rich with storylines. Jaron Williams, the former Georgia high school star, big-time fast riser out of Central Gwinnett, at one point in time had some kind of lower-level offers, got on the SEC's radar, ended up going to Miami because of Mark Richt, beats out Tate Martell for the starting job. Gambling market's a little suspicious of Williams, at least based on what I was seeing a couple of days ago. Florida, though, kind of dealing with a little bit of injury stuff right now. They've had a couple defensive linemen banged up, I think, a little bit here. A lot of pressure on them to go play well in this game. Orlando, a lot of their fans there. This one's hovered, around a touchdown or so in terms of the point spread. This is actually a very, very big game. Really, really interesting. It's a referendum on just how significant of a threat Florida really hopes to be in the SEC. If you're a top SEC team, you beat Miami by a couple of touchdowns at least. If you're scrapping and fighting and clawing in a one-possession game in the fourth quarter, then hope you enjoy the Outback Bowl. I mean, that's just kind of what that is. So this will be a really, really interesting look into the Gators next Saturday. I would never tell you to be excited about Florida for anything, but I will admit that I'm kind of excited about this game. And with that in mind, let's get ready to do our Kroger kickoff as well, because the thing that we're most excited about is what's going to happen the Saturday after that. August 31st in Nashville, Georgia versus Vanderbilt. It's our Kroger kickoff here as a part of DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger today. For some of you, this made more exciting about the announcement made earlier this week that there will be alcohol sales. As if the people in Nashville all weekend long won't be getting enough alcohol. There will be some of that going on inside the stadium on Saturday, 2 Saturdays from now in Nashville. So I've heard from, it just seems like dozens and dozens of Georgia fans, which means that you start doing the math, that means there are going to be thousands and thousands who are going to be there. It's going to be another one of these, takeover type deals in Nashville. I, for one, cannot wait to be a part of it. And of course, around here, when you start thinking about those weekends, next weekend, weekend after that, everything else, we also think about our friends at Kroger, because when we kick off the weekend, we like to go to Kroger and get stocked up on kind of everything that you need to make your weekend fun. It's what Kroger does for you. And by the way, speaking of Kroger as well, you can also get 1 hour delivery right now in select Kroger stores. So if you're like me and your weekends are also really busy, one of the ways to do that is to shop at Kroger and take advantage of that 1 hour delivery. You can go to Kroger.com or the Kroger app, and you can begin placing your order today. Kroger's here and wanting to give you some of that time back on the weekend. So go to Kroger.com, the Kroger app, find out about the Kroger store near you that's offering 1 hour delivery. And all of a sudden, more free time on the weekend, that is never a bad thing. All right, so we'll get ready to wrap up our show and wrap up our week here on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. And, of course, I will invite you to check out DawgNation.com throughout the weekend. I'll have more of my Own the East series brought to you by Georgia's own credit union, our season preview, look ahead on some of the things that are going to matter most for Georgia as it tries to dominate the division and maybe even win a national championship this year. There'll also be plenty of look at what's going to happen at Georgia practice tomorrow, open periods for reporters to see, scrimmage talk after the fact from Georgia coach Kirby Smart, busy on the site tomorrow, DawgNation.com, and, of course, all the chatter going on at the DawgNation Forum. The website to go to is forum.DawgNation.com. Now, I talked about Florida and my excitement about seeing them play, but let me counterbalance that by saying the thing that makes me the most excited is it's the fact that it's been 1,021 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. The Dogs on top in this rivalry for sure. We'll see you Monday right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We'll jump in here and talk to you about anything you want to. And as we do, I'll remind you about my friends at R.S. Andrews. One of the things that can ruin your weekend is if your house is too hot. For me, I can't sleep in a hot house. I'm just tossing and turning, and let's face it, nobody wants that. The big guy needs to sleep. So if you find yourself in the same situation, get that $99 Smiley tune-up. y'all, it's going to be hot throughout the rest of this month, all throughout September, into October. You're having these parties at your house. You're watching the Georgia game. You got a bunch of folks coming over. Nobody wants to sweat their way through that. So get your house cool down. $99 R.S. Andrews Smiley Tune-Up. Story after story, R.S. Andrews has been delivering smiles, and they will deliver smiles for you. But you got to get in touch with them. Find out more at rsandrews.com. So with that said, let me pop in here and get some of your comments. Didn't I do YouTube first yesterday? Let me do Facebook here off the top of the program here today. Wyatt Fielden says, BA, who would you rather face in the playoffs, Ohio State or Washington, or both? So in terms of, Georgia playing an opponent as far as the winning and losing goes, I'm not going to be worried about playing anybody. However, we all know that's not what Wyatt means. And I have said this before, for better or for worse, I don't like the nature of the conversation that exists around Georgia and the now departed quarterback Justin Fields. I just don't like it. It's kind of funny, Eason's one of these guys, when his name comes up, there's no energy around that at all. People can talk about what he did for Georgia and, kind of what he would have done if he stayed at Georgia. That's just a hypothetical question that people can very easily and comfortably have. Even for mentioning Fields' name now, if you look at our comments on Facebook and YouTube, there's going to be some negativity about the fact that I mentioned him at all. And to think that you'd have to deal with that on steroids, because let's remember, if it's a national semifinal, that's a full month of talk. It'd be fun to play Ohio State in the playoffs. It would not be fun to play Justin Fields this year, and I'm just going to readily admit that that's kind of the way that I feel on that. Andrew Richmond talking about some things he may have seen. Yeah, I'm going to leave that alone. But certainly we're always on the lookout for what might be going down. Let's see what else is going on here. Lawton Mullen says going to Nashville week 1, going to be a red and black takeover. Yeah, I really get the impression that's going to be. Really get the impression that's where that's going to be. Galen Jacobs says, did I do the Gator Hater Updater? I sure did, Galen, but thanks for keeping my feet to the fire because you never know when we might miss it. Randy Hall says, what's the total number of players that Florida has lost for the upcoming season? Isn't it a total of 9, I want to say, from what was expected to be the 2019 roster? Total number of 9, I believe. Matthew McGahee says, BA, if LSU wins the SEC West, which y'all remember I have predicted to happen, do you think Alabama's in the college football playoff? I think there is a really good chance that might be true. Now, somebody the other day asked, what are the chances that Georgia could get 3 teams in the playoff? The SEC could get 3 teams in the playoff. We've seen that happen in the NCAA tournament before. Didn't 3 Big East teams make it in the 80s? Am I making that up? So we've seen 3 from the same conference before, I believe, in the NCAA Final Four. But that's obviously more of a merit-based accomplishment because of the fact you have the 64-team tournament, or it's a 68-team tournament now. Would you put 3 SEC teams in? It'd take a lot to have that happen. But could Alabama, if it's like, let's say 11-1, only lost to LSU, could it get the benefit of the doubt? It could. The one thing, though, that Alabama won't have going for it this year that it has had in recent years is it plays a non-conference opponent to start the season, but in recent years that's been a name brand team. It's been a Florida State, not great the year they played them, but it was that. It's been a USC. It's been a Michigan within the last decade or so. It's been, I want to say, Wisconsin at some point in time. You've had these kind of name brand teams that Alabama has played, which was a little bit of an extra cachet to the overall resume, even if the numeric value of the strength of schedule wasn't all that high. This year it's Duke, and David Cutcliffe's a very good coach, but Duke is projected to be in the bottom third of the ACC. So will teams attempt to make a strong argument against Alabama if its losses to LSU and it beats everybody else? I think they'll start to feel like, what are the wins that validate the Crimson Tide? It'd be Texas A&M. But who knows what its record's going to be given how tough its schedule looks to be. Auburn on the road at the end of the season, which is a tough game. But once again, depending on Auburn's record, that either does or does not feel like a big win. Tony Barnhart, our buddy, Mr. College Football, tweeted this a few days ago, which I thought was kind of interesting. That when the first college football playoff rankings come out, look at what Alabama will have played up to that point in time. It will have really no what we think of as big wins on paper at all. So this is a long way of answering what was a relatively simple question. Alabama has the cachet because of the last 5 years to make the playoff, even if it doesn't win the West. It did that in 2017. But this year, if it were to lose to LSU on its regular season slate, there's going to be a pretty strong argument of who is Alabama really beaten, which will make that conversation, I think, really fascinating. Matt Rugavina says, do you think Vandy's going to throw the kitchen sink at us? We're not on a warm-up game for them, nothing to hold back for. I think that Vanderbilt can do some things well. Running the football is an example of something that it can pretty clearly do well, but it should not be a threat and a challenge to Georgia. Now, depending on how high the point spread is on that day, and I know that you can get week 1 lines at various spots, I'm guessing Georgia's somewhere in the neighborhood of a 21 or so point favorite, maybe a tick less than that, maybe a tad over that, but somewhere kind of wrapped around that 21-point number. This ought to be the kind of game, even if Georgia is still working some freshmen into some spots and still, somewhat getting acclimated, to what's going to be a big grind of a season, you'd like to think that Georgia handles that situation in Nashville pretty well. You'd like to think that anyway. Phil Rogers says, will we black out Notre Dame on September 21st? Phil, if I had to guess, I would say there's no chance that happens. But I obviously, know why where the discussion comes from. Adrian Hill says, hey, BA, it's time for Kirby Smart to stop with the nice guy approach on the field and start pounding on teams, even the weaker ones. I don't know that I would say that Kirby's taken too much of a nice guy approach when it comes to certain situations. I mean, I think he's pretty clearly tried to run up the score. Definitely against Auburn last year, he tried to add on the extra score. And he was clearly pretty motivated in fourth quarters of games against both Florida and Georgia Tech. So if you've ever wanted a Georgia coach that hates your rivals, you got one now, I believe, in Kirby. And we've kind of talked about some of the circumstantial evidence that proves that before. Georgia has, for the most part, throttled teams, especially its regular season opponents going back the last couple of years. Does that need to continue? Yeah, I think that it does. But I think of Kirby as being kind of a keep the foot on the gas type of coach. Now, he's not necessarily going to be, throwing the ball around 50 times a game against an opponent that we might think of as overmatched. At least that hasn't been the MO up to this point. But I don't think of him as the kind of guy that's just happy to – you don't hear Kirby Smart say a win is a win very much. I loved Mark Richt. That was one of the post-game comments he frequently made of, hey, we're just happy we won the game. That's results-based thinking for me, and I don't like results-based thinking. I like process-oriented thinking. And so I think that's one area in which Kirby Smart's overall psyche and demeanor, I believe, is superior to Rick's. And I say that as someone who's obviously a huge fan of Rick's. Let me do a couple of Facebooks, and then we'll go back over to a YouTube. Gary Strickland. Okay, how about Gary Strickland? I'm sorry, Curtis Strickland. I apologize. Giving you the full deal here. Got a nice little shopping list of odds for the Georgia Vanderbilt game. Good stuff there. Wyatt Fielden asking about Cedric Van Pran. Jeff seemed to be dropping some kind of hint there at the end, but I don't want to put words in his mouth and say that was about Van Pran. I'm not quite sure, but I mean, he's really the only one right now that I would know of and think of and say, because what the receiver from Florida, it seems like we haven't heard much from him in a while. Van Pran would be the one I guess I would say if there is a next, he would be the one that would seem most likely to be that next. Randy Hall says, this is a good question. Can you think of any other Georgia team that would beat this present team? And he's obviously talking about like in computer simulation world where you have, that team at its best, this team at its best. I know this is going to sound like recency bias, but I believe I've got the numbers to back me up on this. I don't believe there's a Georgia team in the history of the program that would have beaten last year's team, with the exception, obviously, 2017. But this team, I believe, is even better on paper than 2018 was. And this is one of the things that does kind of frustrate me, sometimes even about Georgia fans' discussion of Kirby Smart. It's difficult sometimes for some people to notice how the program is different than it once was. But the talent level, what it has done is all but eliminate close games. Now, I'll give you a very specific comparison here, and I'm going to be very careful how I say this. I had the great pleasure the other day of interviewing the legendary former Georgia coach and athletic director Vince Dooley. This is going to be a part of a video show that we unveil at some point in time. I was thrilled about the conversation. But one of the things that Coach Dooley said in that discussion is that his 1980 team that won the national championship, he talked about how many close games it played that year. Now, to its credit, it found a way to pull those close games out at the end, but there were a lot of close games. Dooley himself said in this interview, it's not like we were out there just mauling people or something along those lines. Well, Georgia, for the most part, is just throttling its opponents. Now, in 2017, you can say the SEC East was down, and so Georgia benefited from some of that. That may be, to a degree, true. But for the most part, Georgia's out there just blistering regular season opponents. Hasn't played an SEC East game within 2 touchdowns in 2 years, for instance. So that's one of the reasons why I'm of a pretty confident belief that if you were to create the computer simulation where it's this team as it is against any of those other teams, 2012, 2007, anything from the early 80s, 1942, you can sort of pick whichever team you want to. I don't know that any team has created the separation and gap with the rest of college football the way this 2019 team has. Over to YouTube for a moment. Get a lot of your comments over here. Crooking 123 says, but even then, given the talent, I think 2019 could be better than 2017. Here's what there's no doubt of. The 2019 roster is deeper than the 2017 was. It just is. Georgia's a lot less reliant on any single individual player, notwithstanding quarterback, where, at the end of the season, Georgia was deeper at quarterback than it would appear to be now, because at the end of the 2017 season, Jacob Eason was your backup. That's a pretty insane level of depth from the quarterback position. But at other positions, Georgia's much deeper than 2019 than it was in 2017. The obvious response to that is, yeah, but what about the leadership and what about the individual contributions from guys like Roquan Smith and Nick Chubb and Sony Michel? It's fair to ask whether the top-end productivity from Georgia this year will equal what it was in 2017. It's one of the reasons why both today on the show and throughout the last few days I've been saying, I want to hear the famous names, the bold print above the marquee names, the Jake Fromms, the Andrew Thomases, the DeAndre Swifts. I want to see those guys dominate the scrimmage, because that's how you make 2019 look like 2017. Chubb and Michelle, those guys are going out there dominating. Roquan Smith going out there dominating. You got great performances from great players. That's how championships get won. So I'm looking to see the 2019 version of those household names. I'm looking to see them, start stepping up in a big way for Georgia, because that's what 2017 obviously provided. But other than that, I think the 2019 roster I just think it's measurably deeper, and I would even say better than the 2017 roster was. Connor Raleigh joins us.
Right, but in a one-game simulation, right now, I think I still take 2017, and I think I take 2012 as well.
You take 2012.
That 2012 team was
really good.
Really good.
It's really good. I'm a little older than you, and this may be my age showing over yours, but I believe the 2007 team may have been better than the 2012 team.
Fair enough. There are,
and I'm not saying it's a clear, easy answer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying if we did like a tournament, I believe I might favor the 2007 team over 2012.
I don't know a ton about the 2007 defense in terms of sort of the true difference makers like I am, but I feel pretty safe saying they didn't have a player of Jarvis Jones' caliber.
They also did not have an Alec Ogletree in that.
Right.
The 2012 defense is better than the 2007 defense.
Yeah.
You had Marcus Howard doing kind of a one-man show type thing, at least in terms of the pass rush near the end of the season. The 2012 defense was solid.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the one thing I'm hesitant to say too much about because it seems overly critical. I thought, unfortunately, the 2012 team was sloppy at times.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, I'm not proud to say this, but as a fan, I didn't give that team much of a chance against Alabama because they'd played terrible against South Carolina. And honestly, as good of a win as it was, and as much as I love beating Florida, I didn't think Georgia played that great against that.
The game was ugly on both sides.
Yeah, that game was ugly on both sides. I didn't give Georgia a ton of credit for how it played against Florida, even though it was great for Jarvis Jones individually. The game was kind of a mess, and so I almost had a little bit of egg on my face as a fan in 2012 because here you have Georgia at one point in time kind of up comfortably in this game, and that was an outcome that I thought was darn near impossible. So it could be that I have a little bit of a blind spot for what I thought was a couple inexcusably sloppy efforts from the 2012 team.
Now, if I remember correctly about 2007, that team also lost to South Carolina and lost pretty badly to Tennessee as well.
Yeah, so if I'm going to ding the 2012 for some lackluster efforts, I better hold that 2007 team to the fire there. That's probably fair to say. Cody Burnsong says, "Have you all forgotten about the Herschel Walker era?" And Cody, I know this sounds
wasn't around for it, so can't technically remember.
So for Connor, there is no forgetting to be done there. But and for me, I'm not really old enough to have remember that era. But obviously, I know the history of it all. And this is where you got to be really careful because this is a sacrosanct era in Georgia football history. But 80 through 83, because you forget the 83 team for Georgia, even minus Herschel Walker, was still very good. 80 through 83, in comparison to the rest of college football, that group is not as dominant as this current Georgia football team is now. This team's lost some games, but you're also playing extra regular season games. You're playing SEC championships. You're playing things now that the early 80s team didn't have. Georgia from 80 through 82 at least, 83 I believe included, didn't play Alabama at all. Didn't play them at all. And that's not me taking those early 80s teams down a peg because they deserve the perch in which they're on. But if we're doing a simulation of previous Georgia teams, I'm not even sure one of the early 80s teams is the second best Georgia team. Mm-hmm. And I know I'm going to get hate mail for that. And I'm not flaunting that opinion necessarily, but when you look at how tough it is to win at the highest level of college football now and how much of that Georgia's doing, I believe if you have a computer simulation of all the teams of all time, 2019 or 2017, that's your best team in Georgia program history, I believe.
Well, and one thing, to sort of push back against this whole, you're underrating the 1980 team. If you actually want to go, Bill Conley is doing this wonderful series on Twitter where he's tweeting out essentially S&P plus charts from teams for over the last 100 years. And a lot of times with some of these schools, Auburn, Michigan, schools that, have one or two national titles but probably should have a lot more. More often than not, the team that ends up winning the national title for that school has not been the quote-unquote best team that program has had, and I think that speaks just a lot to the true randomness of college football.
Now, Chiming Dog says, "BA, that's crazy. Watch the tape." So here's the one thing I will say in defense of the early '80s teams in comparison to the modern days. I do truly believe, even though football was so different back then, if you could create like a real life simulation, I honestly believe Herschel Walker is just as good now as he was back then.
Oh, yeah.
I truly believe that because I'm a baseball fan. Some of y'all know that. There's this old adage in baseball of, are you a guy that can steal bases or are you a base stealer? Now in baseball, there's not that many stolen bases except for Acuna this year. For the most part, the stolen base is not what it once was. But it's one thing to steal a base when nobody's looking. It's another thing to be what Vince Coleman once was and what Ricky Henderson once was. I realize I'm dating myself. It's another thing to be getting a lead at first, catcher knows it's coming, and you still can't throw somebody out. That's what Herschel Walker was. Every human in the stadium knew he was running the football, and he's still just mauling people. And I don't believe that modern defenses would be able to do anything about that either. He was just a Ruthian figure in college football. So while I might favor the current team over that team in terms of a head-to-head matchup, Herschel Walker is still the best player on the field. I don't think it's close.
Babe Ruth would be pretty terrible in today's minor league baseball. Just want to throw that out there.
You still get the analogy. You get the analogy.
Yeah. He certainly wouldn't put up the numbers he put up because, again, like Georgia, if memory serves me right, they beat Notre Dame in a national title game with Buck Bellew completing one pass.
Well, you're not going to disparage my boy.
That's nothing against Bellew. That's just it's a fundamentally different game, especially at the way running backs are used today, than it was when Walker was around. So, he would still be incredibly effective but his game would by necessity would have to change a little bit to fit into today's mold.
But we're talking about a computer simulation,
right.
though, so that means AD's going to play the way they want to.
Right.
And I still think he's getting his rushing yards. I do. Jimmy Hoskins says, BA and Connor, did y'all see the Falcons game last night? I watched some of it. Oh, I did see this. I'm glad Jimmy brings this up. I happen to be watching. DJ Shockley's interviewing who's the old safety from Florida that plays with the Falcons now? Keanu Neal. Yeah, Keanu Neal. And they're like doing a regular football interview, and DJ totally caught him off guard. DJ, by the way, has gotten very good on television, too. He's always been a smooth talker, but he's become a real TV presence as of late. So at the end of the interview, he goes, so Keanu, let me ask you this. When's Florida going to beat Georgia? Is that ever going to happen again? And he just completely just caught Keanu off guard. It was a great job by DJ Shockley, who I do think is a really good analyst now. And, he does the Falcons preseason stuff here locally in Atlanta. If you don't live in Atlanta, you may not be able to see that. And he's doing a good bit of stuff on the SEC network now, in-booth analyst and, guy on the SEC Now program. I think DJ, and he's been a long-time friend of ours here on DawgNation Daily. In some of the early days, he was with us every week. I think DJ's really done a great job.
Switching gears a little bit. So last night on the forum, I gave a somewhat hot take. I think by the end of the season, Georgia's best position group is going to be its secondary. And I want to ask you, I want to ask our listeners and viewers, the end of the season, what is Georgia's best position group? Okay,
we'll do this. And I think your answer of secondary is good in the fact that it might end up being correct, and it's also a little bit surprising. So I think that's really good. I am tempted to give the most boring, safe answer possible and say I believe it may be the running backs or the offensive line.
So Jeff Santel went with the offensive line.
But my first inclination was to say the running backs because I think that Georgia has at least 4 guys, and I'm actually coming around a little bit on Kenny McIntosh, thinking he may be a little bit more ready than I initially thought he might be. I think Georgia's got 5 guys that it would be just fine with. And at the very least, I know for a fact they've got 4 guys they could be just fine with. So I love you saying that you think the secondary may be the best position group because it's an interesting answer. It has enough potential validity that you can make it, but it's a much more interesting answer than what I'm giving you. I do want to counterbalance that, though, with the safer thing of saying that Georgia is really, really deep at the running back position, I believe. And you'd have to have one of these guys that I don't presume to be a starter right now, Daniel, who I think is really chasing, Tyreek Stevenson, who, when he's 100% fully healthy, is a tiger. I mean, just a fire-breathing dragon back there. You'd have to have one of those, what I think of as non-starters, Lewis Cine included. You'd have to have one of those guys be really, really good to be as good as, like, the depth at the running back position. But it may be. But it very well may be. Do you think that Campbell holds on to his job all year long?
If you listen to Justin Tell, it's a no. I'm somewhere in between. You obviously still have a lot of Tyson Campbell stock.
And some of this is just stubbornness. I'm going to stick with it. But I have no reason right now. I mean, what we have is we have compliments coming out of DJ Daniel, a lot of whispers from the scrimmage, for instance. Compliments have been coming out of Tyreek Stevenson for a while just because of his stature as a player. But I haven't heard one whisper of negativity about Tyson Campbell. I haven't heard that at all. So as we say all the time, if you want to start making predictions about who's going to have big years and who's going to be on the field, as unpleasant as this sounds, you can't just argue for someone. You have to kind of argue against somebody else. There's plenty of arguments for DJ Daniel right now, and some of those for Tyreek Stevenson too. I haven't heard an argument against Tyson Campbell yet. Year older, with that speed, pretty good size. I got no problem with Tyson. If that's one of Georgia's weaker links, then Georgia's on its way to a really good season.
Campbell's a guy, he started 11 games last year. He looked a lot better in the Texas game when he started that. And, a lot of people are mentioning the outside linebacker group. I think with that, so the difference between what I see with the secondary and the outside linebacker group, it would not surprise me if the outside linebacker group, is the best by the end of the season. But I think the 2 things to keep in mind there are, one, a lot of unproven guys there, whereas in the secondary, J.R. Reed was voted first-team All-SEC this preseason. Richard LeCount was a third-team guy. And then, Eric Stokes is a guy who I think just about every Georgia fan would agree has a real good shot at getting onto that first team come the end of the season. Whereas, the outside linebacker guys, none of them have a whole lot of production there, and it is a much bigger projection. The other thing, Georgia rotates secondary guys. You will see Otis Reese sort of come in more certain matchups. I imagine it's going to be hard to keep Lewis Seen off the field as well in certain, game situations. Whereas with outside linebacker, Kirby Smart made this point at the scrimmage last week. A lot of times there's only going to be one of them on the field. They're sort of going to have, your three down linemen, and then one outside backer, and then your two middle backers, because that's when Georgia will go sort of 5 defensive back look. And the reality is, as good as Aziz and Nolan and Jermaine and Walter and Adam Anderson all could be, you're not going to get them on the field as much as, say, you will with Stokes, LeCount, Campbell, and Reed.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting to watch and pay attention to. So over here on YouTube, some folks talking about my point about Campbell. G. Grace, who is an Alabama fan, says that he thinks that Tyson Campbell's a safety. And Grace, I will tell you, our buddy Jeff Sintel has suggested that the high-end comparison for Campbell, his sort of high-end comp, is not so much being, lockdown corner. It may be a guy like what Minkah Fitzpatrick was for your Crimson Tide. So Jeff Sintel has suggested in the past that he may be more of a Minkah than he might be a DeAndre Baker. Double R was also talking about how, Campbell just needs to learn to be better in coverage. But he was on the field a lot last year that gives him a chance to do that. And I know it seems like he got burned a few times, but here's the thing. While Georgia's havoc rate for secondary wasn't great last year, its overall pass defense was really pretty good. Georgia was not giving up a lot of big plays. You had a Thorpe Award winner on one side of the field that was accomplishing that. You had some good safeties helping you out there in that regard too. So I know this is going to sound like the most generous description possible, but I'm going with this. Campbell got burned a lot because that was the guy that offenses were forced to go after because they didn't want to go anywhere else. I mean, a lot of other guys really, really disincentivized pass attempts on their side of the field. So Campbell took more shots last year than the typical cornerback would because it was impossible to throw on a Baker side. So there's a little bit of a mitigating factor when it comes to that. And I guess what this all leads me to is, I'm not picking on Scott Harris, but Scott Harris made a comment I want to respond to. He said, y'all, we got to face it. There's a chance that Tyson Campbell is a bust. Here's what I'm going to tell you. The facts of life are every team has busts. Even teams that recruit at a really high level like Georgia does, a lot of 4-star guys, more than its fair share of 5-star guys, even Georgia will have an elite recruit currently on the roster who's going to turn out to be a bust. You just can't play defense against that. Somebody's going to be a bust. But I am very confident that Tyson Campbell will not be one of those. And if I'm wrong, then I'll just be wrong. I am confident that Georgia's player that does end up living up to his recruiting billing, it's going to be somebody. I'm not sure if I know who it is, but it's going to be somebody. I don't believe it's Tyson Campbell. I just don't.
And, to the whole bus thing, Alabama was last year, for a team as talented and as stocked they are, they gave up a lot more 40-yard plays than you would think a team would with that talent. So, Tyson Campbell was certainly not alone in that aspect. And I would just add, yes, Campbell, had a few catches made on him, but it wasn't for, he's just like so out of the picture, guys are just running right by him. He's right there a lot of the times. He's just got to, get a little bit better at contesting the catches, learning to locate the ball, knowing when and where to turn his head around. And it's sort of the little things, I think, with Campbell that come with playing cornerback a lot more because, in high school, he didn't play a lot of corner. He only played corner his senior year there down at American Heritage. And, it's sort of the same thing with Justin Fields at quarterback. He didn't have a lot of reps in high school. And I do think that, that did affect him when he got to that next level and wasn't able to process and read things necessarily as quickly as someone who has a lot more high school experience does.
Alton McGurk on Facebook says, you asked the question earlier, best position group by the end of the year. Alton gives a good answer. He says, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's the receivers just because people are concerned with the experience and lack of knowing if they step up and shock the world, then they will be the best part of the team. So I like the idea of betting against the mainstream on this. That's typically a pretty good decision. I think the problem here, though, is if you're going to risk something by saying this, if we're all throwing some money in a pot, for instance, you have to be really good as a position group to be Georgia's best because I mean, there's some groups that are going to do a good bit of producing for the Dogs this season. So in terms of the receivers not being a problem, there's the chance that's the case. But it's actually a very bold statement given where the receivers have compared to other UGA position groups. It's a very bold statement to say that it'll be the biggest and best by the end of the season. You want to say, I think the receivers may be fine. That's actually not that big of a bar to cross for me. That's not that much of a threshold to cross over. But saying best position group on the team, that's pretty bold right there. Because, unfortunately, even over the last couple of years of success for Georgia, the receiving group, and I know they put a lot of guys in the league last year, the receiving group has not been close to the number one reason why Georgia's been winning these games.
Mm-hmm. And, we should at least mention the offensive line because right now they are, and I think both our opinions, the best position group on Georgia's team. I do wonder, and part of this is just tough to quantify offensive line play, but how much better can this offensive line get in, certain statistics? Is Georgia going to run for more yards? They've already led the SEC in rushing the last 2 years. Does Jake Fromm get sacked 3 times all year?
Yeah.
Does
I'm glad you asked me about this because I actually wrote about this last Sunday. And if you look at because there are ways that you can measure offensive line statistics. Football Outsiders, for instance, has done a really good job at this. The 2 areas in which Georgia was not great last year, and it's actually kind of 3 if you want to separate these into 2 different things. Georgia was not great protecting the quarterback when the defense knew a pass play was coming. Georgia was 75th in the country last year on sack percentage on so-called passing downs. Georgia was not great last year on what you call stuff rate, which is the percentage of times that you that you get stopped in the line of scrimmage. Not great last, and by not great I mean they weren't top 5 in the country. They were fine. They just weren't top 5 in the country. On short yardage situations last year when you knew a running play was coming 2 yards or less in 3rd and 4th down, not among the nation's best there. On typical rushing plays, Georgia was 5th, 6th, 7th in the country when it comes to offensive line yards. On some of those other areas, not. So the point that I made on the East piece last week at DawgNation.com was even a very good offensive line, if it's a short yardage running play and the defense knows a rush is coming, if it's a long passing situation, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, there's really maybe only so much a great offensive line can do to help you in that situation, which is, I think, something that puts a little bit more of the onus on the creativity that some people have called for. If it's 3rd and 2 down near the goal line, the offensive line may not be able to bail you out because the defense can just send more bodies. 3rd and 11, thinking about Auburn in 2017 or LSU in 2018, there's not a whole lot the offensive line can do if the other side's rushing 6 pass rushers or something like that.
It's math,
Yeah.
People, and I understand where they're coming from when they bring up, the goal line and short yardage issues a year ago. But, you and I think both believe that falls more on just the creative. Georgia needs to find a way to get more creative there because at the end of the day, if you have 5 offensive linemen, let's say you use 2 tight ends, so you have 7 guys. But if you have 9 defenders on the line of scrimmage, it's not a whole lot you can do there.
I mean, if I had my wish, and I know this is easier said than done because these are difficult plays to execute. If you've got the best line in college football, and Georgia very well may have the best line in college football, to me, with the kind of offense Georgia runs, that means that you ought to make the play-action pass the bread and butter for your offense. And you have a smart quarterback, you've got time to throw, you've got running backs that obviously require respect, even though history shows that the quality of the running back doesn't necessarily diminish the ability to run play-action pass. It's a hard play to execute well, but it's the most efficient play in all of football when ran correctly. So if I could say one wish for Georgia, my one wish would be use this big offensive line to really bolster your play-action pass. That would make Georgia impossible to stop, and it would vault Jake Fromm ahead of Trevor Lawrence and Tua Tagovailoa, and it would make him the best quarterback in college football.
Right, and we can look at the NFL for this. Part of the reason the Rams have been the best offense in football the last 2 years is they run, I believe, something like 39, close to 40% of their pass plays out of play action. And we have a running back like Todd Gurley, and Georgia has, they don't have Todd Gurley obviously right now, but DeAndre Swift, potentially Zamir White, Brian Henry can sort of function in that same kind of you have to take this threat seriously. That's something Georgia, I think, should look to use a lot more this year. And, now with guys like Pickens, Blaylock, Demetrius Robertson as a burner, Lawrence Cager, you have guys who might be able to take advantage of those plays.
Changing the subject, Dion Ware says, why are people not counting on Lawrence Cager? Number 1 wide receiver early at least. I think it's an interesting comment from Dion. Dion, here's what I'll say that I believe. Right now, as of today, if Georgia played Vanderbilt today, I believe that Cager is one of the top 3 receivers on the team. I believe he's out there on the first snap of the game. I think he'd be there with Tyler Simmons, and I believe that Demetrius Robertson would be the other. I believe right now that's your top 3 receivers. Do you think Cager finishes the year, Connor, as one of the top 3 receivers?
In terms of like plays or in terms of wide receiver yards? Terms of yards.
Let's go yards. Yards more so than catches. Let's go yards.
Based on what I've said in the past, no. I think it will be Mr. Blaylock, I think it'll be Mr. Pickens, and I think it'll be Mr. Robertson in that order.
How are you going to have Robertson and Blaylock both?
I think Robertson's going to move to outside.
If he did, that'd be something. If he did,
or or Blaylock could do it as well. I don't think those guys are necessarily pigeonholed right now to just sticking in the slot.
I will say this: you heard Kirby throw a compliment Robertson's way about playing the slot the other day. And while I'm always the belief, if you've got this speed demon receiver, it's better to have him outside than not if he can handle the role that goes along with that. But Kirby just kind of dropped this in on Saturday. And, Demetrius is over there in the slot. He's making catches, or whatever day it was that he said this. I kind of take some of the stuff that I've seen and heard thus far this summer to lead me to believe that D-Rob's actually pretty comfortable in that slot position right now. Going across the middle to catch passes, for instance. I think he's actually fitting in pretty well with that right now. And I guess I'm kind of backtracking on what I initially wanted, where I want him to move to outside. Now I'm not so sure I do anymore. Now all of a sudden I'm getting a little bit more. This is taking Blaylock out of the conversation for a moment because I do want Blaylock on the field too. But I'm getting pretty comfortable with D-Rob in that slot. And as much as I hype up George Pickens all the time, the receiver that I'm the most sure is one of Georgia's top 3 at the end of the season, D-Rob's probably my answer right now.
Mm-hmm. I think that's, I don't know if he's going to be the leader or number 1 receiver.
I don't know that either. Yeah.
But top 3, I think you feel pretty safe. And, with Cager, if you talk to a lot of people around that Miami program who have sort of discussed him, I'm sure Dennis Wilson will chime in here. He could make the spectacular catch, but the issue with him was sometimes – the easy catch he didn't always make. And I think at Georgia, if he's still like that, if he's, dropping really catchable balls, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, but you also got to factor into this too. I mean, listen, he's not the only receiver on the Georgia roster that's had some drop issues in the past. But I'm going to argue for Cager and say, if you caught 6 touchdowns at the FBS level, you're good enough to play at Georgia.
Mm-hmm. It's not an indictment of, again, this is why I think he's going to start week 1. Talent is clearly there. Over the course of the season, if the drop issue persists, and again, Mecole Hardman was a guy who had drop issues early on in his career, and those were not there last season. Yeah. So it's not like guys can't improve from this. But if that issue persists, I do think it might be, that will certainly encourage a guy like Pickens, a guy like Matt Landers, to sort of maybe even jump him on the roster, on the depth chart.
Yeah, so, I mean, if I'm saying safest bet to be in the top 3, not my pick to be leading receiver, but safest bet to be in the top 3, I'm saying D-Rob. So that means if you want to put Cager in there, now you've only got 2 spots to give to him. And I do believe that Pickens ends up getting one of those other ones. I don't think that's true in September or even certainly August 31st. I think it's probably more true by the time you kind of get to October, go to Tennessee. That's the kind of guy that could, really show out against, I'll continue to say, I think a pretty good Tennessee secondary. That's where you may start seeing the Pickens stuff come up. And so that leaves you now 1 spot. I think there's a really good chance that Cager gets it, but, you can obviously argue for Blaylock. You can obviously argue for Simmons there too. I still think Trey Blunt in some respects going to be heard from here. Mm-hmm. Blunt's one of these guys that, I just think he catches the ball when you throw it to him. I know, and George hasn't thrown him to him much, but I'm also, going by, what we've heard about Trey as well in terms of his work ethic and things like that. You let that guy go across the middle and make a big catch at some point in time, all of a sudden we're going to have a bunch of people in our comment section saying Trey Blunt needs to be playing more. And that's exactly what's going to happen because he's going to do some things that people are going to like.
I have another. It's a receiving related take for you.
All right.
You ready for this one?
Always.
I think James Cook has more catches this year than DeAndre Swift does.
That's a huge opinion. Can you give me some context for what do you say, 30-something catches for Swift a year ago?
32 catches a season ago. I think that number is going to go down. Again, Georgia's in load management mode right now with Swift, and they can say what they want. And I'm sure Kirby's going to say, "Oh, you guys are making a big deal about nothing." But given his injury history, Georgia's not going to need him to catch a whole lot of passes in a lot of these games. You think maybe the close games will be the Notre Dame, Florida, Texas A&M, maybe, and Auburn. Not remove the maybe, and Auburn. Those 4 games, and then, obviously the big playoff games. But other than that, I think I'll be interested to see how cautious they are with Swift. Whereas if Georgia, with Cook can, he might not be the same type of athlete, but he's still clearly a pretty good one. And, Georgia's going to be up late in a lot of these games, and I do think that, we saw early last year, that's where Cook got some work, especially in that receiving game. So it's not, it's not going to be 40-20, but, it could be 25 catches for Cook and I think 23 for Swift.
If Cook catches 25 balls, you better get your popcorn ready. That's going to be an offense worth watching right there. That is going to be an offense
I know you don't want to see Cook succeed.
No, don't start that. You already got Jermaine Jones over here on YouTube light me on fire. Not Jumaine Jones, the former UGA great on the basketball floor, but Jermaine Jones saying that I don't want to see James Cook. I'd love to see that. That'd be a lot of fun. The other thing that he said is I'm a prisoner of the moment when it comes to Lawrence Cager. He says there's no way that Cager's beating out Matt Landers. I'm of the belief that Cager's ahead of Landers in the depth chart right now. Connor, would you agree with me on that if you had to speculate at the moment?
Yeah.
So
the Vanderbilt game's tomorrow. Cager is the first wide receiver out there.
So now this may change. Landers may overtake him, but I'm of the belief that Cager has the nod over him right now. The one thing you got to remember is that Cager and Coley know each other. So, there was a comfort level there before Cager arrived. And is Landers in the mix for this stuff? He absolutely 100% definitely is in the mix. Absolutely 100% definitely. But if it's 7:30 on August 31st right now, the first 3 on the field for Georgia, barring injury, are Cager, Simmons, and D-Rob. And we'll check our math on this that night to see if we end up being right about that. But that's the way that it is right now. Prisoner of the moment, he says about me. All right, it's incredibly late. Connor, anything else you want to say here?
No.
It's probably fair. We've been on for quite a while here. Matt Rokovina gives you an over/under of 0.5 touchdowns for Landers against Vanderbilt. That's an interesting thing to think about. Yolia Ursol also says that he thinks that Landers is better than Cager. He may turn out to be. He's going to get his shot for sure. I like this one from Philip Jordan Wells, who has a hot take. He thinks that Fitzpatrick gets 4 touchdowns this year. If they throw it to him, he's going to catch it.
Isaac not only had 3 all of last year.
Yeah, 4 for a tight end would be a lot. But if you throw it to Fitzpatrick, I believe he'll catch it. All right, it's fun to talk about. Yeah, I love this fantasy football type stuff where we start, thinking about who's going to have what, and obviously we all have a tendency to bet the over on this stuff a little bit, but it's still fun to talk about for sure. By the way, I hope you'll check in with my friends over the AJC to get your Atlanta news now. It's one of those things I check in with throughout the day, just kind of stay up to date on everything that's going on. I also love, as you head towards the weekend, it's a great time to kind of find out some of the things happening around the Atlanta area, especially we get close to the start of the festival season. A lot of that kind of stuff you can stay up to date with when it comes to AJC.com. And this is really cool. This is out now. If you've lived in the Atlanta area your entire life like I have, you know about this. Super 11 for the AJC is out. I'm a big Super 11 fan. Really, really enjoy that. Best 11 players in the state of Georgia for the upcoming high school season. They've always done a really good job of, like photo shoots and things like that. It's a really cool thing. So go to AJC.com. You can see the photo shoot for the Elite 11. Find out more about these guys. And it's not the Elite 11, it's Super 11. Super 11. And by the way, Chipper Jones House for sale. You can see that as well. AJC.com for all your Atlanta news now. Check in throughout the day. Once again, ajc.com. All right, big thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Air, heating, plumbing, electric, darting the whole gang there at R.S. Andrews will deliver a smile for you because story after story, that's what they've been doing for quite some time. Y'all have a great weekend. I'll see you back on Monday, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Have a great day, great weekend. We'll talk to you soon.